Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about some books of poetry and the topic of poetry in general and its connection to esoteric thought, which also includes the Golden Dawn. So I wanted to talk about some books today, poetry books, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this in regard to esoteric thought is because I was realising how there are not many videos discussing the relationship of poetry in connection with esoteric thought, and at least two prominent members of the Golden Dawn were poets and did consider themselves very good poets. And those two people, those two members of the Golden Dawn, were W.B. Yeats and Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley and W.B. Yeats were rivals, not only in magic, but they were rivals in regard to poetry writing. They both regarded themselves as very good poets. So I wanted to talk about the particular poets that influenced people like Aleister Crowley and the relevance of poetry in connection with esoteric thought, and also in regard to ritual and magic, because the idea of writing ritual or magical incantations and things like that are always in verse form very often. So I think that's another reason why the Golden Dawn members particularly had a high regard for poetry. So the first book I want to show today is written by Charles Taylor. This is a relatively new book. And Charles Taylor, for people who don't know, is a very well-regarded philosopher who has written a well-regarded book called A Secular Age. That is a great book for anyone who would like to look into that one. And that one is to do with the history of religion and spirituality, and contrasted with the modern opinion that we live in a secular age. So this book of Charles Taylor is commentary on poets, and the title of the book is Cosmic Connections, and the subtitle is Poetry in the Age of Disenchantment. And I think this is a great book for the times that we're living in as well. The way that he calls this the age of disenchantment, we are particularly in the age of disenchantment, that's for sure. This is a hardcover book. It's quite thick. It was only published at the end of last year, 2024. And it's a great book, not only for discovering different poets, but it's a great book for the commentary that's in here. It's great commentary. So I'm just going to talk about what's in this book to start with. And it starts off by one of the very, very interesting things about this book. It's in different parts, but one of the very first chapters is on nature and history. And nature poetry were a very, very strong influence in connection with the Golden Dawn and esoteric thought. Nature poets are also known as the Romantic poets, but the idea of them being romantic poets, it's not really romantic in the usual sense of romance. It's really in regard to nature and a form of idealistic utopia that a lot of these poets were interested in, and it was really in rebellion against the industrial age. Now, the important thing about these different poets that are in here is it does have a really good chapter on Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley was the main poet that influenced Crowley in a very big way. Percy Shelley wrote a very lyrical style of poetry, and Crowley did as well. Crowley had such a high regard for Shelley, and in some ways he tried to write his own style of Shelleyan poetry, really. If you read the poems of Shelley, and you read the poetry of Crowley, you'll be able to see a very similar approach and a very similar style. So there is a great chapter here on Shelley, Percy Shelley, and there is a great chapter on Rilke. Rilke was also very associated with esoteric thought and anthroposophy, very highly regarded in that way. And there is a great commentary in here on Emerson and transcendentalism, which is also a big influence in esoteric thought. He also talks about the French poets and symbolism. So there was symbolist poetry and symbolist art at the time. They also were connected with esoteric thought and were a big influence on the esoteric thinkers at the time. There's also a great chapter on T.S. Eliot, and the commentary on that is titled The Buried Life. And then at the end of the book, in part 5, it talks about cosmic connection today and perennially and ongoing into the future, and how relevant it is for today. As a matter of fact, I was just looking back here on the commentary on Rilke and visual art as well. So this is a great book. It's really beautifully and thoughtfully written in the way that Charles Taylor writes, and I think it's absolutely worth getting if you're not only to do with the poetry and the poets, but to do with the commentary. For example, one of the commentaries in here is on the wider space of meaning, which is really important with esoteric thought. So this is a great book, Charles Taylor, Cosmic Connections, Poetry in the Age of Disenchantment. It's a really great book for people who are interested. Now, the next book is a bit different in style, but absolutely worth getting, all in connection with esoteric thought. This is called The Last Oblivion, which is a great title, and it's also the title of a poem in here by Clark Ashton Smith. Clark Ashton Smith was a close friend of H.P. Lovecraft and actually was an influence on Lovecraft. They were close friends and they exchanged ideas and they did influence each other. Clark Ashton Smith also wrote great early science fiction stories. But this particular book is just the poetry of Clark Ashton Smith. I'm not sure if it's still available, but I do know that there is the poetry and stories combined in a publication by Penguin Publishers. So if you can't get this one, you could also look into the Penguin edition that's available. It's not exactly the same book, but it's worth getting as well. So, give you an idea what's in this book of the poems and the topics. Very, very esoteric book, the poems. First of all, there's a great introduction about Clark Ashton Smith. For example, one of the beginnings in here is called The Apocalypse of Evil, Ode to the Abyss, poems about Saturn, the planet Saturn, The Abyss Triumphant, A Dream of the Abyss. These are the different poem titles. That's the first section. Then the next part is called Medusa and Other Horrors. So that is the types of poems that are on the theme of Medusa. Then you have the next section that's all about the land of evil stars, things like this. This is getting into fantasy, dark fantasy writing, the Twilight Woods, the Titans, Rosa Mystica, the Desert Dweller. Then you get a section of poems that are all based on the dream, the theme of dreams. So they could be nightmares or they can be dreams. There's one poem called The Last Goddess, Enchanted Mirrors. Then you have the next part that's all about the refuge of beauty. One poem is called The Tears of Lilith and The Last Oblivion, which is the title of the book. I think that's a great title. There is a poem titled Transcendence. Then there is, in that same section, there is The Hill of Dionysus. The next section of poems is called To the Darkness, The Incubus of Time. Then you have the next part that's called The Sorcerer Departs. And there is a poem dedicated to H.P. Lovecraft. And then after you come to finish all the different sections of the book, there is a glossary and a bibliography, an index of titles and an index of first lines. Now, I'm just going to turn to the glossary at the back to give you an idea of what's in the glossary. The glossary is great because it gives you an explanation of, for example, if they are mythological figures or things like that, different aspects of fantasy. Just an explanation of all of the different topics and all of the different things that, for example, it may be something out of alchemy or whatever, and there's a really good glossary to explain, to define the different words that are in the book. So The Last Oblivion by Clark Ashton Smith. This book is really worth getting. Otherwise, you can try to get the Penguin edition that's still available for his poems and stories in one book. And the subtitle is Best Fantastic Poems of Clark Ashton Smith. The next book is called The Romantic Poets. And this is really, really good if you want to read quite a few of the poems of Percy Shelley. So this is a really beautiful book. It's got a soft purple faux leather cover. It's quite thick. It's not a very expensive book, but it's got a beautiful cover. And I'll give you an idea. You can get this William Blake poems in this book. Of course, Percy Shelley. I got this book because I particularly wanted the Percy Shelley poems, but there's William Blake, of course, is also a great note in esoteric thought. There's other poems in here, other poets in here as well, but the two in particular, there are large sections of the book, the poems of Blake and Shelley. So the Romantic Poets is another one that's worth getting if you're interested. I'll put some details below the video for people who are interested in getting any of these books. So this is a great book. And the last one is a commentary on Romantic poets. It's a fairly new book. I think this one was only written last year as well. It's by Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom is a really well-known commentator, and he was passionate about poetry. I don't own many books by Harold Bloom. He's kind of considered to be a little bit out of date now, but this is his best book about Romantic poetry. His commentary in here is really, really great. I'll tell you the subtitles of this book. They're really quite notable. Harold Bloom. By Harold Bloom. The title is called Take Arms Against a Sea of Troubles. This was one of the last books that he wrote because he was feeling very disenchanted, very disillusioned, and he knew he was getting towards the end of his life. And of course he saw the times that we are living in as a sea of troubles. And then there's a second subtitle, which is The Power of the Reader's Mind Over a Universe of Death. So I think that is a great subtitle. So it's quite a thick book. I'm fairly sure this was only published end of last year. No, 2020, which is not that long ago either. But it is one of his last books. So only, 5 years ago at the most, 2020. So I'll talk about what's in this book. This one has got the prelude in here. It's called Reading to Stay Alive, Poetic Thinking. Now, reading to stay alive, what that really means is poetry can be great for inspiration and aspiration, but in times of trouble or in times of darkness, personal darkness, poetry can act like an anchor for people, where you are reading certain poems that really resonate with you. So this starts with William Shakespeare and John Milton, and the subtitle of this chapter is In Every Deep, a Lower Deep. So that means there's even more below the surface to look at with that. Then there is a chapter on Milton and William Blake, the human form divine. So that's a very interesting concept in esoteric thought. Then there is a chapter on Shelley and Byron. That one is called Serpent and Eagle. There's other poets in here as well, other chapters on other poets, but I wanted to particularly mention the ones that are connected with esoteric thought. There's a chapter, of course, on Yeats, William Butler Yeats, and D.H. Lawrence, called Start with the Shadow. And then the last chapter is called Dante as Centre and Shakespeare, the Circumference. There's a great index at the back of this book as well. So I just love the commentary in this book. It's a really interesting book. The commentary is different to a lot of the usual poetry critics. It's really worth getting. As I said, I probably own one other by Harold Bloom, because this book particularly caught my attention when I could just see not only the poets that are in this book, but the commentary is so well written and thoughtful, and it's got a very wide scope. It's got a really wide scope, which I think is really all to do with the stage of life that Harold Bloom was at when he wrote this book. He was obviously in a very reflective state of mind, and poetry is great for that anyway. So I wanted to talk about this book today as well. So that's 4 books of poetry that I wanted to show and talk about today, and also highlighting and letting people know about the particular relevance of poetry and esoteric thought, including members of the Golden Dawn who regarded poetry as very important in their esoteric journey, and their theories and concepts that they formed during the Golden Dawn years, and the kinds of influences that they took from poetry and art as well. But particularly poetry was actually quite a big influence. And as I was saying, magic and ritual quite often involved verse. And a lot of these people in the Golden Dawn actually wrote their own poetry and their own verses for ritual and magic. And it also influenced their general lines of thinking with esoteric paths and esoteric journeying. So I wanted to talk about those particular books today, and I will put some details below the video. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.